Voice Teacher Podcast.
Welcome to the Voice Teacher Podcast. I am Amy Geddes here with Sam Johnson, my co-host, and we are voice teachers. Today is an exceptionally exciting day because we have with us, drum roll please, Teri Stock. Woo!
Yeah, this is fun. I like sound effects.
This show is recorded in front of a live studio audience. That is a lot of cheering.
That is a lot. Wow, they just can't get enough of you, Teri.
What do you expect? It's me.
Right? Yeah. Right.
So, Teri, thank you so much for coming on. Who is Teri Stock?
We want to know.
You want to know who Teri Stock is?
I want to know who is Teri
you
Stock.
Haven't heard about me?
Oh my goodness. Only the last 20 years of my life.
Yeah. So, golly, who am I? I'm like whoever I want to be.
You've got many facets.
I have a lot of different things I'm involved in. But for today, I am a voice teacher and a singer, and I'm a vocologist. And
Yay!
So that's what I'm representing today.
What is a vocologist?
So a vocologist is basically a glorified singing teacher who gets extra training in how to deal with damaged or injured voices, or aging voices, or voices that have problems in general. And I became a certified vocologist when I took through the National Center for Voice Science. And I took that course and became a certified vocologist under Dr. Ingo Tietze. So
big deal for anyone who doesn't know him.
Right.
Ooh.
I still get a little bit post-traumatic stress talking about it because it was like the hardest thing I've ever done. Anyway, but I did that. So I guess I should be proud of it. And I've now been asked to be an ambassador for them to speak and to go and help choirs and teachers and anyone, groups of people or whatever, and just kind of instruct them on the voice because it's something we don't see and it's something we take a lot for granted. So, yeah.
That is really exciting. What got you into teaching singing lessons in the first place?
Well, I was a singer and performer, but I became more of a full-time teacher when my oldest son became ill and I couldn't perform anymore. So that's when I really started teaching more. It was a different stage, a different kind of stage, right?
Yeah. It's so funny. Okay, so what was the question I was going to ask you? Oh, so when was that turning point? Because I think all teachers go through, like if you go on the performer turned teacher pathway, I think there's a moment when you decide, like everybody kind of goes through that, okay, I'm still performing, but I'm teaching on this side. And then we kind of go, wait a minute, I love teaching. I am passionate about this. This is going to be my thing. Did you have a moment like that? And when did that happen for you, if it did?
I think mine was kind of gradual. I had these questions. I had studied with a lot of really great teachers over the years who all had different ideas on what they should do with my voice. And so there was a certain amount of confusion. I have a husband who's an ear, nose, and throat, head, neck specialist. I kind of thought there has to be a logical approach to this. I mean, this is a biological instrument. It has to work in a certain way. There must be an optimum way for this instrument inside of us to work. And so I started doing a lot of investigation and, I came across a technique that seemed to work for me. I had two voices. I had like this on stage, I had like a belt voice, and then I had this light soprano voice. And with this technique, I was able to integrate the two voices. And it was with speech level singing, Seth Riggs. And I started studying with Dean Kalin, who was one of his main teachers at the time. And that's who really put my voice together. Because of the way he taught, it gave me some confidence in my teaching too. I didn't feel like I was just throwing spaghetti at the wall every day and hope some of it stuck.
No teacher ever feels that way. What are you talking about?
There's some days I still feel that way. You have to have lots of tools and some stick better than others.
That's for sure.
So I don't know if that was a really I don't know. So I think it was a more of a gradual moment for me. I started getting students. I felt more confident with my teaching. And then, you get one of my first students was Sam. Hello,
I was
Sam.
one of the
Yay!
Yeah.
first?
Yeah, you were like one of my guinea pigs. I
What?
mean, early on when I really started really I taught off and on, but I mean, when I really started teaching, decided I was really gonna do it, Sam was one of my first, I would say in the first 3 or 4 years anyway.
Oh my
And
goodness.
his
Wow,
because, he was such a superstar, you get one of those
he
in your,
is.
studio, and it attracts others because people come to you thinking that you can make them sound like Sam, which we know is impossible, but, you know but people have that perception.
Yeah, I took a lesson or 2 from Dean, and then he was like, "Oh, I know a teacher who is closer to you who might be great," and sent me over to Teri, and so glad that he did, because we spent an entire summer working on Les Miserables,
Yeah.
and if we didn't have all that time, that would have been a total disaster.
Wait, because who were you in Les Mis?
I was Valjean, and it was my
He was
first
Okay.
Jean Valjean,
musical.
he wanted to be, he wanted to be
I
Fa
thought that I
no,
was more of a Javert, for sure.
Javert, yeah.
Mm,
And physically, yes, but I think Sam was the only one that could hit the notes of Jean Valjean,
There
so
were there were, like, a few other people, I think that,
okay.
and I referred them to you. I think Zach could have made it. I think Zach could have done it, but,
Yeah,
I'm sure that people could have figured it out, but I was really, really lucky and also just thrown into the deep end into something that I had never really done before with like I mean, I had sung a lot growing up, but I didn't have lessons until I was with you and Dean, and so I was, like,
yeah,
really confused. The most, like, lessons that I had had before that was singing along with Brett Manning's tapes, which was
okay,
kind
mm,
of a natural, in with you guys just
yeah.
because, it's all the same sort of route,
they're
but
similar.
yeah, that was really throwing me into the deep end, and honestly, if I didn't have that one domino fall, I would not be teaching voice lessons.
I know we were talking a few weeks ago how you were the catalyst for Sam teaching and how I had a teacher that did the same thing. That moment when a teacher says to you, you could teach, and you go, well, maybe I
I
could.
remember it clear as day, just like you were teaching me, and it was probably not that far into our relationship, and you're like, "I think you're gonna be a teacher, so I'm gonna teach you how to teach." And just that one line, like, it's amazing how much, like, one person can have that impact, and honestly, like, that's why I do it, is because I had, like, 1 or 2 lessons before, and they did not go well, and my confidence was just terrible, and having one person believe in you can be just this massive difference in a good way or in a bad way. And so I just hope that we can get more teachers like Teri Stock in the world.
Our
Well,
job
Terry
is to
Stock's getting
inspire.
old. She's gonna be retiring soon, I think.
Yeah, so we
Whatever.
gotta we
Don't do
gotta
it,
get the
Terry.
new flock in.
Yeah.
So your focus at this point, like, are you doing mostly rehabby stuff or what kind of?
I'm working there again, I started working with this one young singer who's kind of a little superstar, and so I started getting a lot of students from the One Voice Children's Choir. So I've got
Mm.
that little group working with them. I probably have 10 right now from there. I have, some adult students and some rehab students. Not I wouldn't say that's the biggest part. I'm always open to, that's what I'd love to do, so when they come my way, I'm here.
So what are your favorite, like your go-to exercises for vocal rehabilitation, and what kind of things do you have to listen for to choose one over another?
Well, it depends on what stage they are when they come to me. I kind of stage out the whole healing process when you're dealing with a vocal injury or just some maladaptive vocal behaviors, and it's not really that far off from how I teach. I think anyone that comes to you first, they've got to establish that they've got a chest voice and a head voice, and then you got to connect them, and then it's got to get smooth, and then you make it strong. And it's really not that much different when I'm working with an individual voice. And I usually will take them to the very beginning, like I would any student, just to test it and see where they are and kind of work with that kind of framework. And, and then I have tools for all those tools to find your chest, tools to find your head, tools to connect them, tools to make it, that smooth, and tools to make it stronger. And so most of my tools are based on vowel and consonant combinations and sometimes just vowels. It just depends on where they are.
Mhm.
And some move very quickly and some we have to move really slow.
I wanted to ask you, what are the most common pathologies that you see? And what do you like? How do you recognize and differentiate between one or the other before you even get to the point where you're referring them to Curt or Anna or another ENT?
Well, if I'm hearing something in a voice for more than 2 weeks, I mean, there's a couple little tests I can do, here in the studio. We do, the OS test, or I'm
Okay,
finding the
explain
happy
that
birthday
because
What is
test.
that?
there are some teachers
Well,
that might not know what that is.
it's where you have the singer hold out, let's say they find a comfortable pitch. They find the pitch for themselves. So you'll just have them hold it on a s s no, there's no, it's not. I'm sorry, it's unvoiced. Yeah, unvoiced and voiced. So would be unvoiced. So you have them hold out the for as long as they can and you time it. Then you have them pick a pitch and go on a ah. If they can only hold out the ah half as long as the s, then sometimes there's a problem. I will repeat that test 3 or 4 times, just to make sure because sometimes it's a coordination thing. The other one I use for just swelling, I mean, that one usually will indicate if there's a pathology there.
The
Swelling,
first
so you
test,
can do
this test,
the what?
that will this test will
Mhm.
indicate if there's a pathology.
Yeah, oftentimes that's when you can hear if they do this and do the "ah" and they can't hold that "ah" very long, it tells you there's a lot of air escaping there, and if they're doing it in a lower pitch, those chords should be coming together pretty well. I mean, there could be other reasons, but I've had pretty consistent results with that one, and it's one they use a speech pathologist, and they go in and just look because there's no reason to guess, but I'm usually right.
So what pathologies are the most commonly, what do you determine there's a pathology there, so what is it usually? Is it usually nodules? Is it granulomas? Is it, what's the most
Nodules are
Hemorrhages.
common?
probably the most common.
Mhm.
Those are singer's nodules, are the most common, and they're not always they're called singer's nodules because I think singers feel the effects of them more, but I would say most of the nodules I have come in, there's also a speaking problem. I mean, they're usually vocal overusers or, they think there's no expiration date on their vocal folds, so, they use them freely. And so there's usually that component. The other can be a polyp, which is that's usually a vocal strain issue. There can be vocal hemorrhages. Vocal hemorrhage, you can usually tell just by their history. They've been like COVID caused a lot of vocal hemorrhages because of the coughing. You know,
Mhm.
extreme coughing can cause a vocal hemorrhage. Someone can be on stage and just hit a note and it can happen. And it doesn't have to be as extreme. I used to think it had to be pretty extreme. It doesn't have to be.
Mhm.
It can
So
just happen.
what do you usually find are, like, the precursors to experience a vocal hemorrhage? I mean, is it usually if somebody's been sick for a while and they're overusing or just somebody's genetic makeup? Like, some people might have a more delicate, more prone
Yeah,
instrument?
all the above. They could maybe be on a medication that makes them bleed a little easier. For
Mm.
women, it seems to happen easier during period time. If they're having their period, that could make it a little more vulnerable. But I mean, it's just one of those things that kind of happens. And
Is it usually under a lot of pressure, like when somebody is exerting a lot of
well, that
force on
can,
their voice?
that can cause a focal hemorrhage. So, but if it's a professional singer that has done that day in and day out, there's usually a perfect storm that comes together that will create that hemorrhage.
I want to ask you about nodules and just kind of like the stigma around that. I mean, there used to be this big thing like you were doing things so wrong if you get a nodule, and there was always this like, well, you must not have a good teacher, you must not have good technique, like there's all this, I think, pressure for singers, but like I think it's lessened, but like I mean, growing up for me, it was like nodule was such a dirty, scary word, and everybody was like so afraid of it. But I think things have changed. We understand a lot more about what it is. Not that you want to get them, but what's your take on that? Like, how do you feel about, the way it's perceived and how it can be treated, and how afraid should singers be of getting them, and how should teachers approach them to kind of help their singers not be so afraid?
I think with a lot of singers, professional singers, or even community theater I wish say amateur recreational singers, they're kind of a rite of passage. I mean, I'm not saying that everyone gets them, but I think it's so common because it's such a common it's like blaming, someone who plays soccer when they get a sprained ankle.
Mhm.
It'll happen to some and some it doesn't happen to. So, and some are gonna be more prone to it than others.
High
So,
voices? Like, I
yeah, and it can be related to singing, but most times it's usually what they're doing with their voices when they're not singing that causes the problem.
Mhm.
And the singing could add to it if their technique isn't proper. But I know that my singers I'm so careful with that I know that their singing technique is pretty good. So if one of my singers happens to end up with a nodule, which I've never had that happen yet, but if that were to happen, I would say it was probably something that they're doing outside, that there's the vocal use that they've added in. I think that, and part of my mission with the National Center for Voice Science is to kind of instruct maybe some of these directors and people that maybe work with a voice but don't understand voices. They just kind of, here's a voice on the stage and, you know, I'm going to make get the best out of them, for the show, and they don't understand that the best out of the show is providing some support for that singer, knowing that you can't rerun a really hard scene 10 times in a row without a mic if that
Mhm.
singer's going to be mic'd. It's really interesting because the mic just totally changes the way a person sings anyway. So I don't know if you're going to be mic'd, why they're not mic'd from the beginning. So they get used to that and they're not over singing. They're understanding the balance over a long period of time with the mic and the singer. Because
mhm.
Mhm.
mic singing is totally different than regular singing. There's no reason if you're mic'd that you should be getting that much. You should be having any strain. Anyway, that's just
Right.
my I when I performed back in the day, this will really date me. We had no mics on the stage. I had to project in a whole theater, and this was musical theater. This wasn't opera. So I had to be able to project to that whole theater I was performing in. I was not mic'd. So I probably did oversing a lot
Mm. I have
because I
even
paid the
found
price.
when I
Go ahead.
practice at home, like I have learned because, my studio is relatively small. It's not like I've got a big echoey room to get any
Yeah.
feedback. So I turn on GarageBand and just turn on the echo and listen to it in my headphones so it feels like I'm singing with a mic
Yeah.
because I need that feedback because then I don't oversing because I'm like, okay, I can check in, I can hear that, I can feel it rather than like the practice rooms in college where they're all like soundproof and padded and you're just screaming your guts out even though you're in like a little box that
Yeah.
should give you good feedback. I just would always feel so strained after using any of those rooms. So anyway, that's
It's
something
hard
I
because
have
I mean, so
found.
much of it really is just resources. If you're running a show and you can't practice in the theater with mics most of the time because just the people
Mhm.
to run the mics cost money
Yeah.
and the theater is usually occupied. And so getting as close as you can is really important. It's like practicing with the shoes you're going to wear. Like you want to get in the shoes as fast as you can so you learn how to
Exactly.
actually move as the character. And so finding any tricks to kind of recreate that at home are really useful.
And if they
Mhm.
can't if they can't create, if they can't have mics the time, during practice and whatever, don't be telling you want more volume from the singer. You wanna because the oftentimes the director's sitting back and they wanna know what that final product is gonna sound like, but they're asking for a final product sound that's gonna be mic'd, and so the
Without a
singer's
huge
gonna
part of
Mhm.
the
oversing.
equation.
Yeah, so if they understand that they're they're risking not having a singer for the performance, they just have to learn to be a little bit more patient with that singer, not tell him to give them more volume.
How are you doing this kind of outreach?
I don't know yet. I gotta just, so we were given this, so they want Kurt and I to kind of do it as a team, and Dr. Tisa asked us to come in for a meeting, and we did, and he gave us the marching orders, but it's kind of up to us to create. So it's basically just put it out there, and we'll come and speak, for a nominal fee, and just on basic vocal health and how to, maintain the adult voices and children's voices. And I'm like picky about kitty voices because this is one thing I learned in the course with Dr. Titsa is that children, they got little tiny squishy, stretchy voices, but they can create the same loudness as an adult. They can create the same loudness, but at 60% more effort.
Really?
Yeah. So that's why we have to be really careful with kiddos that we're not asking, when they come in and they're creating this really loud sound and it's, giving you the same sound as an adult, it's at 60% more effort.
And they can get away with it, and they balance it, and then they go through puberty and try to do the same thing, and then they end up like me, just,
Well,
like,
that
trying to
can
fix
happen,
all
but
these
they
old
also at
habits.
high risk for nodules,
Yeah,
especially if they're
Interesting.
doing that in the really high end.
exactly. Yeah, just because there's more times that the chords come together to create that callus.
Exactly. Exactly. So they're, the higher pitches are definitely at higher risk for those types of things.
I think that trying to
Oh.
expect an adult sound out of children is one of the worst things that has happened, um, and it just keeps getting exacerbated by, like, the TV shows of, "Let's expect this 10-year-old to sound like a 35-year-old, and then expect them to
They
have a
get
career
really
that lasts
excited
more than
about
3
it.
weeks." Do you have any strategies for how you work with pubescent voices, to kind of prevent some of those kind of mindsets from developing or
Yeah, I get 'em mixing right away. And then I
Mhm.
explain to them if they mix correctly, if they use intensity rather than loudness, if they use intensity, that the audience will perceive that 15 dB higher, louder than a full out yell.
So
So, like,
So
explain the
they're gonna
resonance
difference between
intensity?
intensity versus, did you say intensity versus what?
intensity using it's more using resonance strategies, right?
Mhm.
So I just talk about intensity with them because getting more of that resonance strategy like the hung with the vellum port open. It does 2 things. It gives that intensity to the voice, that little something something that will carry over a lot of most instrumentation, and it takes a lot of weight off the vocal folds. The more of that sound you have, it just shapes the vocal tract in such a way that gives the vocal folds a little boost. It makes it easier. And
So it's
it's a sound that
basically,
most resist at first because it doesn't feel that strong.
yes. Well, and I like to tell my students, it's like letting the acoustics do the work. You
Yeah,
don't have to let the you don't have to put so much force on the muscles if you just
yeah.
line up the acoustics and let them do the job.
'Cause the
And I use
human
the
ear
illusion
is
of the
just
swing. So if a kid's out swinging, they can swing on their own, but what do they like? They like that little push from the parent, right? And it just keeps that pendulum going, and the vocal folds are much that same way, so if you use the right vocal tract shape for the note that you're singing in higher notes well, you just using it, and there's all kinds of different ways. So, but if you like using the hung, because I wrote a whole paper on that, like if you're not gonna sing on an NG, but using that particular exercise gives a little boost. Any correct mouth shape or semi-occluded vocal tract shape is gonna give a boost to the vocal folds,
and to the
which we all
higher
Uh,
want.
high frequencies, and I think that, like, helping
Yeah.
people listen to a sound spectrally of, "Oh, this is an ah, I recognize this as an ah, but this is also an ah," and it just what's different about this sound? It has a lot more of that high frequency,
Yeah.
and then you can almost just track that band, which is kind of an interesting thing to do in Voce Vista is just isolate
Mhm.
those higher frequencies and then sing along kind of trying to match that. People forget that the ear is so much more sensitive to high pitches, so it will sound louder if you can bring out those frequencies
Well,
without doing anything else.
and here's another interesting thing, this is why people have a tendency to oversing. Lower pitches come back to the ear, and the lower frequencies circle back to the ear. Higher pitches go straight out. So, they
mm.
don't circle back to the ear. So we don't get that auditory reinforcement to our ear on the higher pitches. So people think they have to make those louder because 'cause they're not hearing them as loud inside.
Hmm.
That's fascinating. I feel like I just got like 5 times smarter today just listening to Terry because like things that I never thought about before, or maybe just understanding a little bit deeper and going, oh, that's how that works, you know? It's fascinating. I'm so glad you're coming to educate us. I might have to take some lessons
Yeah,
with you,
thank you
Terry,
so
and
much. And
just yeah.
that's one of the really fun things about I think just learning about voice lessons is you can be introduced to something when you're 18 and then 10 years later have it just slightly different wording and suddenly it just fills in so many puzzle pieces and it's a blast.
Oh, but Terry, you were fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to have you on again because there's going to be more questions that we need to
Well,
ask and
there's so
answer.
much like I say that to me, it's a very holistic what I do is very holistic. So, hopefully the singers I have coming all the time are pretty prepared if they do get a vocal injury and they already have things lined up that we're on top of it if something were to occur.
Yeah.
So, and then if it does, then we just kind of go through that process. And the process is got to have head voice, chest voice. And sometimes you lose that head voice. If you got a lot of muscle tension, sometimes that head voice goes away. So reestablishing that, getting them connected, getting it stronger. Yeah, get it smoother and then stronger. So that's the process.
Perfect. Okay, and you mentioned a paper that you had written about that, the NG. Is that something you feel like you could share? Would that be something that we
I
could
shared
do
it
as a
as a vocal
giveaway,
tip. I don't
or
know if it was ever read, but I do have it. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that would be kind of fun, like, because right now we have a chapter of Dean's book out. I think it'd be fun to rotate through the different, if any of our
Yeah.
guests have something that they want to share, we'll
Sure.
offer
It
it
wasn't
as a
anything
giveaway.
spectacular, believe me. It was just a little short thing on why the hung exercise works so well. So I have a student
Perfect.
knocking at the door. So,
Awesome. Well, we'll let you go then.
Good
Thank you
all
so
timing.
right.
Thank
much.
you so much,
Thanks. Thanks
Teri.
for having me.
Hey,
That was fun.
that was so
Little
fun. Oh my
little
goodness. I
walk
love
down memory
Terry.
lane in some parts of it.
Yeah, I've never done lessons with Terry. I want to. Like, just I don't know. I just feel like there's so much she explains. And I think she kind of is very understated in how she presents herself. Like, she's just
Yeah.
so normal and real and loves to joke around and, doesn't make it like I know so much.
Yeah.
She's
She's very
awesome, very
approachable.
approachable. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got the same word. That's great.
So fun.
Ah.
Thank you all for listening. Go check out voiceteacherpodcast.com. There is a link in the description, and if you sign up for our email list, you'll get a free chapter of Dean Kalen's book, and maybe we'll even talk Teri into getting her paper on that. Anything else, Amy?
Awesome. That's what. Thank you so much for listening and spending time with us today. We hope that you learned something new and that you can go forth in your teaching studio and help people to sing better. So, have a fabulous day, people.
Thank you for listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by IFTOM, International Voice Teachers of Mix. Your co-hosts are Sam Johnson and Amy Geddes. Learn more about IFTOM at iftom.org and find Sam Johnson at vocalese.net and Amy Geddes at breakthrough-studios.com. Voiceover and theme song by Maz Mazak, and this podcast is edited by Amber. You have been listening to The Voice Teacher Podcast.